Hello, folks. Welcome to another exciting podcast of Access Granted. Always great to have a conversation with John Morton, Field CTO, Britive. And today we have an exciting topic which is top of mind for many trailblazers out there in the identity space. Is called NHIs. Um, and before, John, we start, I want to ask you, is NHI means non-human intelligence, National Hockey Institute? What does it actually mean?
Funny you bring that up, Noman. I would say the year now, for anybody listening in the future, is 2024. NHIs I had not heard of until 2024, which I know to understand is non-human identities.
I see. Okay, all right. Non-human identity, right? Not no hands involved, right? One could be a no hands involved, right? It could be the same thing.
There you
But
go.
the whole concept of robotic process automation or non-human to non-human interaction is becoming a lot more prominent, right, and a lot more impactful in this today's world. So maybe explain to our audience, right, people who are not familiar, even though I don't think it's a new phenomena. Explain to our users who may not be involved or who maybe like a fourth grader. How do you explain to a fourth grader what is the NHI?
Yep. So yeah, non-human identities, to your point, is not new. The terminology is new, and I appreciate the marketing geniuses who put that together. But um, the way I describe it simply, and when I learned quite a few years ago when I was first in identity at a company called Avexa, non-human identities, right? I like to say humans are belly buttons. They're a belly button. You have a belly button. Every human has one for the most part. You log in. Anything that doesn't have a belly button that's interacting with the system, though, that's a non-human identity, right? So it's a very simple way to kind of differentiate: is a belly button doing the action? If not, then it's a non-human identity.
Got it. And how would you explain it to in the technology world, right, where people are doing day-to-day functions in the cloud infrastructure or in traditional data center world? What are some of the examples that would resonate? Why even NHIs exist, non-human identities exist? What are some of the common use cases that you see or that would resonate with the people?
Yeah, so I'll start with one from, again, quite a few years ago, about 15 years ago when I was learning about it. We didn't call them NHIs then. Remember, it's a new term. But I used to work in a data center at Oppenheimer, and I didn't work in the data center. We protected it for security. But the funniest thing was we used to have this Linux ecosystem, right? And part of that job that we were doing there was doing an assessment, an inventory of identities that did things. And I was mainly a Windows guy, not as much Linux. So when I talked to the Linux team, they told me, hey, whatever you do, never rotate the password or modify or change this cron job that we have that runs every night. And I'm like, well, it's part of my job and risk. I got to go assess it, figure out what it does. And they're like, that's the key. No one knows what this cron job does, but every night at midnight, it does something very critical. And they were so petrified to remove this or touch this. Function basically was what it was. It was just a script in Linux language, right? Cron jobs run on a specific time. And that's what it did. First time I really got exposure to it and understood how these non-human identities operate behind the scenes to do a lot of things, whether they're scheduled tasks or whether they're functions or whether they're very specific capabilities. But again, no belly button involved. That's a non-human identity.
That's great. That's great. So, in today's world, right? So basically, in a way, you can think of non-human identities is a way for humans to make their jobs easier, right? In a way, how you can automate things. So think of it, NHIs is your friend, right? So they are doing the work while you're chilling, in a way. So you can think of it as your minions or friends who are doing things, but at the end of the day, um, it needs to be secured, right? So my question is that why all of a sudden people are talking about NHIs? Because as you said, this has been there for 20 plus years. Robotic process automation, cron jobs, right? Things doing things where humans are not involved. Why all of a sudden there's a big buzz around NHIs? Is it some security? Is it just scale? What has changed in the recent times?
I think what has changed is really the cloud. I think the cloud has really changed the dynamic of these the you shine a light in the dark and all of a sudden you see thousands of robots doing things behind the scenes. That's what happened with the cloud, specifically in tools like Wiz. So up until now, I would often talk about it. I would call them non-person entities, service accounts, machine IDs. There's been different names over times, and normally CISOs, because there was no actual compliance to look at them per se, you know didn't pay too much mind to it, if you will, even though most major breaches came from it. But recently, with tools like Wiz is shining that light in the dark, and all of a sudden, all these things are lighting up, right? So the prevalence of the cloud has really reminded people of this pivotal role that these NHIs play and how critical it is to protect them, or at least know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something interesting about API keys, security tokens, service principals, service identities. I think it has a huge impact in the way cloud operates today. Um, what are some of the uh, common use cases that you see? I think you did mention Wiz also, right? It's a sort of a fantastic platform to generate all sorts of alerts around what is misconfigured, what is misprovision, what are some of the patching that needs to happen, what are some of the user access risks that they see. But then, once that alert happens, there has to be some automated processes that needs to happen. And then again, it comes to a non-human robot or non-human identity doing something for you while it receives alert. So talk about how some of your customers may be leveraging, Britive with Wiz and some other solutions to handle this non-service identity privilege access.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. So, so like CSPM tools are really good at this. Wiz, Orca, I'm not sure about Prisma's capabilities, but I imagine they're the same, where they'll identify a lot of these issues, these findings that they may find in cloud. The traditional way of doing it is you may have a human go through all these alerts and fix them. But to your point, Naman, if you are a smart person, you want to automate. I don't want to spend all my time trying to remediate. Can I automate where I can? That's exactly where NHIs fit. So using Wiz as an example, it lights up and it says, hey, we may have some open ports, or we may have a misconfigured overprivileged identity. Thank you for telling me all those problems. What do I do now? This is where an NHI comes in, and it's basically orchestrating that remediation response. So a lot of our customers at Britive will use a tool like Wiz to show them these things. Then they integrate with some orchestration tool. Shout out to the homies at Torque. They're really good at what they do. But these orchestration tools that are the NHIs doing the remediation things within Britive. So it's a complementary start to finish. Wiz gives us the alert, an orchestration workflow or play kicks off. The remediation is done by an NHI using a tool like Britive. So that's a very good use case of how NHIs happen behind the scenes.
Great. So in that case, the role of Brightive is to ensure that the permissions or authorization that we are providing to those bots that are working for you, making your life easier, they have just-in-time ephemeral access and not something that's statically programmed, which is again then become a breach risk for the organization. Is that what Brightive is being used for?
Oh man, that's a beautiful way to kind of put it up. So there's two aspects of it. One, right, we want to remediate and make just-in-time access for the endpoints itself. AWS, that's where Wiz is saying the problems are. We want to remove the static access there. That's one aspect of where Brightive fits. The other aspect of it, though, is how is this orchestration tool doing it? To your point, you don't want to make the problem worse, right? You don't want to say, I want to make automation so easy and powerful. I give this NHI overprivileged God mode super admin access 24 by 7 either. So, to that case in point, where you're trying to use NHIs, we're not trying to expand the problem, right? We're not trying to say some advanced attackers find an NHI and they're doing this and take over everything. The NHI itself also should have temporary authorized privileges when it needs it to do its task. Remediate this Wiz alert, take those permissions away, right? So that is exactly a great use case for that.
Fantastic. And I think I'm seeing that more and more security breaches are happening because of somebody stealing credentials for a non-human identity. It could be a service account, it could be a service principal, and we have seen recently that people, when they hack passwords, it could be like a password or secret key or API token somewhere on the GitHub, or accidentally got put to GitHub, or maybe in somewhere you hard coded this in your code and you push the code into a public repo and it gets stolen, right? So when you talk to CISOs, right, and you are very well connected into CISO community, and then NHIs has been around for a while now, right? So has that thought changed in terms of the importance of securing those NHIs, or is it still debating on whether this is important or not important? How the thinking have changed from a CISO's perspective?
Yeah, there's currently an evolution going on. So this is very, very important. A lot of times, when I would talk to CISOs or anybody owning operations, they would tell me, and now it's going to make sense to people now that we've taught them a new analogy. They would say, "Well, we have a CI/CD build process, and in our pipeline, no one has access to production." And what they mean is no belly buttons have access to production. They have this CI/CD build process that goes and deploys all their environment, and you got to jump through some hoops to get access as a belly button. What I used to giggle and kind of laugh about was still say, well, there's an NHI executing that function, it's orchestrating it. And there are NHIs operating throughout the entire build. Just because I'm not a belly button doesn't mean there's not risk. I used to get laughed out of meetings, or, a lot of times people just, they didn't want to think about it. That has shifted dramatically a lot now, thanks to tools like CSPM tools, where they're starting to say, oh, wait a minute, that guy wasn't crazy. There are access tokens that are overprivileged, even in this protected CI/CD land, that, it is becoming more prevalent. So there is a good shift in a good way to understanding that I am super happy you did this, right? CI/CD build process, keep the belly buttons out. But also, how are we protecting the NHIs downstream in Kubernetes or in these environments holistically?
Yeah, and I'm seeing that the groups like NHI group and similar other groups are being formed with people who are experienced in this space and have worked in financial industry or other highly regulated industries. They're seeing this as a problem that will be widespread, and they're trying to educate people, bring that awareness in terms of what are the best practices around securing those NHIs. Anything that you want to highlight on that aspect?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So these orgs that are coming out like NHI, right? Super good. They even help break down just the vernacular because people get confused. Like we said, non belly button, that could be a lot. RPA bots, right? Software supply chain. I just shared a contract with the Britive team where, companies are trying to absolve themselves of third party risk because they're saying they can't insure everything, right? So these groups are doing a very good job of getting the message out there about what NHIs are, where they live, and just the risk they can expose folks to.
Yeah. And I think the another reason probably is that the domain of influence of when these NHIs are used as part of the various use cases, whether it be automation, whether it would be SDLC, like software development lifecycle, or AI use cases, the more and more NHIs are being used, and more they have access to critical data, right? So the importance of securing this is becoming paramount, because I think one customer that I was also dealing with, their whole thing about is, okay, I have different data sets, different data resources that are that I'm ingesting the data into a centralized brain, and then I have robotic processes that are extracting data from one location, and they are taking actions on certain other things as well, right? So it's basically a workflow based engine where you have, think of it like the bots, right, which are these NHIs. They're learning from something. They are using their vector DB to maybe program their prompts or augment their prompts, and they're leveraging LLMs to generate an output, which then again gets fed back into your HubSpot or Salesforce or any other tool that you may want to. This whole business intelligence, engineering intelligence is all driven through workflows, and for each workflow, there's an NHI that is sort of a gatekeeper or doing that action on your behalf for or on a human behalf. So anywhere if it fails, right, in anywhere, right, and if you are able to breach that data, then it's a big problem for the enterprise. So I think the more and more the we see it, the explosion of the use cases that are leveraging NHIs and what they are accessing is critical, right, in terms of securing that whole risk. Is that what you're reading as well?
Definitively, right? So I'm a fan of theory to practice. Anybody knows me. I'm actually pretty technical, so I like to hands on keyboard build things. And the key here, normally security and automation, they're conflicting ideas, right? If you look at it not as security automation, but if I'm a operator and I'm automating something, security is a roadblock. So if you're going to make things hard, I'm not going to secure it. It's as simple as that. So what am I trying to say? Anybody who wants to see it, go check out the Britive LinkedIn profile, my LinkedIn profile. I did a video on robotic process automation with a tool called Tag UI. Tag UI basically just clicks on things and does things, and it does it kind of like in a QA method. So I wanted to just highlight there can be a happy medium between a lot of these NHIs that are doing routine, mundane tasks and security. You can separate out authentication and authorization. You can still move fast and you can do it securely. That's the shift I'm seeing around NHIs. That's good news. That's good news.
That's great. And with this whole focus around NHIs, right, and this whole, I think I always say that in the industry and the customers they move like a herd, right? So they're always that initial trailblazers that validate things for you, and then the entire industry or customer enterprises they move like a herd to follow that trend. And so I'm seeing that in NHI world there are things happening, and there are people are seeing opportunity to build something innovative, and there are companies that are being formed specific to solve NHI use cases, right? So from an overall customer perspective, because I think, and then there are two parts to these questions. The first question is that if this problem is been around and we are seeing this problem continue to grow, why the legacy players are not able to think about and add that piece to their products,
Right.
right? And there are people who are just building companies on NHIs, which may make sense for certain group of or subcategories of in in overall industry. But do you feel that customers want to have a consolidated vendor that can do both human and non-human identities based on whatever they're doing, or do you think that there will be niche players just focusing on human identities? And I also want to add, from an overall Britive perspective, I want you to highlight that how is Britive doing it, right, in general?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, I used to be a, operator before. So like, I wasn't always on the vendor side, and you got to sell the people what they want. And up until now, right, most people were like, I have a compliance mandate that says I have to buy a 20-year-old legacy PAM solution for cyber risk insurance to protect belly buttons. Completely driven by compliance. That was it, right? I wouldn't say compliance is coming around. I wouldn't say there's new documentation around this, but the shift to things like zero trust, putting a spotlight on NHIs, the smarter customers who aren't just doing security to be compliant and check a box are absolutely saying, how do I reduce the risk of these NHIs? So, what you see happen in the market is a lot of these folks, they build, as of 2024, niche solutions to target NHIs. Okay. Hey, man, they're selling people what they want. The smarter customers, though, are saying, can I use one platform to do belly button use cases? Can I do NHI use cases? Can I do secrets use cases? Right. So there's always that shift to consolidation as a buyer. You also don't want to have multiple niche solutions to do the same thing. So I know that was a convoluted answer, but the key here, compliance is normally a driver. That's what people were buying before. That's why they turned a little bit of a blind eye. Now that NHIs are getting exposed, people are looking for solutions. A lot of niche startups coming out. If there is a platform like we have at Britive that does both, it's almost shocking that people are like, where have you been all of our lives? We didn't even know this was a capability. We're doing a better job with things like this podcast. So thanks, Naman, for getting the message out there and just educating people on things that maybe they just weren't focusing on or weren't aware of. So this is a key.
Yeah, so what you're saying that from a Britive perspective, at least the initial vision or the what founders were thinking, they never looked at it as belly button versus NHIs. They looked at it as identity. It could be a human, it could be a non-human or a machine. but we have to make sure that we holistically manages the permission, just-in-time permissions across the board, right? Whether it's cloud, whether it's data center, whether it's on-prem, it doesn't matter. Okay, I got it. Hey, I just got this question that, okay, this NHIs, do you think that they will get pissed off if they don't get the permissions?
That's the beautiful thing about an NHI is it's not going to file a complaint or report security for removing its access. Now, you could stop its access, right? So, as long as we make that seamless, we want to keep things flowing. But to that exact point, right? They're the best use case. And there were some competitors early on that used to want to do all this identity analysis and access analysis. And I used to tell them, quote me on this, it's so impossible to do belly buttons because they're all over the map. Someday we may do something. No, on your day changes day to day. You need different things all the time. You know what doesn't need to change its access very often? An NHI. If it is a well orchestrated and architected solution that includes an NHI, its access will almost be to a nanosecond on time and exactly what it needs. That is the best use case for having temporary privileges. You can have the authentication to it, like an API key or a cert or a token or even password, username and password. Do not give it 24 by 7 access, though. If it runs the same job every day, it can check out the access when it needs it, does what it wants, and then we take it away.
Great explanation. Let me come back to the world of compliance, right? Audit and compliance. And, obviously we have audit playbooks and auditor community, compliance officers. They define the controls. They define, what is, protected versus non-protected looks like. And, all your cyber insurance premiums and everything basically is based on your, intent, whether you intend to protect it or was it something which is basically ignorance from your part, right? And based on that, you end up paying more. Now, it comes to non-human identities, right? How much do you think that today's compliance and audit processes takes this into account? Because you look at all the belly buttons, yeah, oh yes, all good, right? But breaches are happening because of non-human identities, right? Or no human involved type of phenomena.
Yeah.
Where do you see that growing? I mean, do you think that it's like a maturity thing and it will start to get more and more stronger? People are getting more mature in terms of looking at, hey, no, this is a 10x exponential scale than the belly buttons, and you must take care of it. What do you think?
All right, so I'm going to actually heap some praise on my GRC teams and compliance teams, governance, risk, and compliance teams. Some of them are very, very sophisticated and smart. Why do I say that? When I get into some customer meetings and events, I'm asking them around NHIs, I'm asking them, what's the driver, right? Why is this organization looking to do anything at all? And you'd be surprised. I'd say 50% of the time they'll let me know internal audit, their own internal audit of their organization, has taken a current requirement and they've amplified it. So what does that mean? In the case of compliance, what I'm seeing happen is there's always this compliance mandate that applies to belly buttons. Everyone gets it. There should be no account where the password is set to never expire. That's a very basic idea, right? And what most check the box teams will do is they'll say, well, let's go look at all the humans and make sure they're not set. And let's go look at the service accounts and make sure they're not set. Well, what happens then is some smart internal compliance teams or audit teams, they'll say, well, what exactly is an API or what is a token? And then somebody will teach them, you know what an API token or, a token is it's just bundled authentication. It's a username and password. And then they'll start thinking, wait a minute, that still falls under that never expiring password. Are you all rotating tokens? Are you all rotating API keys? So I have seen a shift where compliance teams, especially internal auditors that are more sophisticated, make that leap to NHIs and they apply it to their own controls depending on their acceptable risk of their environment. So that is happening, not as much as I would like. And it's pretty cool when I do see it because I'm like, where did you all learn this? That's awesome.
But let me ask you this, right? So humans are all driven through accountability and what's in it for me, right? Sort of they always tune the what's in it for me radio station WIFM. But in this particular scenario, so let's say you are a CISO or you are a IAM program owner, and you say, okay, I have 500 employees, and it's all secured. It's all secured. Nobody has static privileges. But then out of those 500 people, I have 200 developers that are creating those NHIs in the backend. to automate the task, right? Now, the point is that let's say if a breach happens because one of those minion password credential got exposed, right? Who is accountable? I mean, how do you even know? Okay, this XYZ Jason did this Lambda talking to S3 bucket and has this credential stored in some GitHub file that got exposed, and now I exposed all of my data, right? So how do you even think that accountability and who's responsible in general in an organization?
What I see happen and what I hope changes a lot more is normally CISOs like to play the blame game. They like dashboards and widgets so they can point the finger with a report. I told you so, right? That is a very common thing that a lot of folks want to do. My favorite type of CISOs, though, that we work with at Britive, they're actually proactive. They're allies of the business. What that means is, hey, we're going to assume you're not going to be nefarious. You're going to do things to automate your job. How can I give you the guardrails to help you and automate your job? How do we get those NHIs to do things more securely versus I want to go get a report and say how bad you are, dev team? I want to be your friend. How about we find some tooling that we can build into your process that do things securely, right? That should be the switch and the happy medium there. That's not happening as much as I would like, but most folks are still give me a report to tell everybody how bad they are so I can absolve myself of risk. The best sort of CISOs I engage with, security teams, are that latter, like I said. How do we work together? How do we build this in securely so you can move mega fast and we're secure? Win win,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I can see that, let's say if I am a CISO, then one of the things I would immediately want to see is consolidation of all these NHIs in one place. Because if I don't see, cannot take action, right? So having those NHIs in one place with the human identities, and then having that process in place where there's no static credentials. It has to be just in time ephemeral. Even if they take care of these two things, right? Even if the passwords get breached, right? You are not able to do things because you don't have access. So, and you are able to see things in one place, and you are able to provide just in time ephemeral because that gets revoked once the job is done, right? So you don't have 24/7 access. I think these are like two low hanging fruits I can see immediately that CISOs can think about incorporating in the environment.
Yeah, exactly. And they could feed the rest of their ecosystem. That's something I like to talk about at Britive is like, look, if you separate out authentication and authorization, you can only track authentication so much, especially for a service account. If a service account's out there running literally around the world and it's labeled service account A, how do you know who's using it, doing it, what? Once it's out there, it's out there. So if you can give it authorized privileges, service account A has access to nothing. It has to call another solution and go through some sort of controls. Then we're helping CISOs there because guess what? Then I could feed that to my SIM or some better solution where we're doing better analysis. Remember, it's a robot. It should have always done the same thing all the time and it changed once. We can find that way easier and track it down than just hoping, with some report or bundled up together, there's management. I think you get the point there, Naman.
Yeah, so I think the overall I see that NHIs are your friend, right? They are basically there to do the work for you, make life easier, help you give scale and agility. They are here to do the work for you while you can chill, right? Think of it this way. But at the same time, at the same time, you need to make sure that their interactions are being secured and monitored, right? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to take the risk of things that you wanted to do manually with all the controls in place. Now your minion or NHI is doing it with no security in place, right? So that's the whole goal that it cannot be avoided. It will be there, but it needs to be secured.
Yeah. If I could add just a tidbit on that, Naman, since you're adding to it, right? And I think it's valuable. Everybody, another cool thing that's happening, everybody is saying identity is the new perimeter. I agree. Two things I hope people take away from listening to this: identity is not just credentials, it is not passwords. If that's, you're wrong, number one. Number two, identity is not just belly buttons. Identity is also these non humans. So, summarizing there, Naman.
So any other key, I think we are up almost time now. So any key takeaways for people who wants to know about it and want to implement certain approaches, which obviously does not interfere or disruptive all of a sudden because people love crawl, walk, run approach. Any one key advice that you want to give them that they can take as a best practice for the organization?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, right? And I think it's the fact that, NHIs are out there. If you don't think they're running right now, oof, you got problems. So let's acknowledge it and accept it. And let's figure out a way to provide guardrails to those folks that are doing it. Sure, you may want to figure out all the things that are out there, right? But if you're going to try to do that, don't use it as a slap on the wrist. Don't be that heavy handed security. I prefer the approach of, I know you're doing it now. Let's figure out how we do it better with some guardrails and go from there and start building out the processes going forward. You can separate out the authorized privileges, especially for NHIs. If there's anything that doesn't need static access, it's an NHI, period.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's great to hear that the Britive platform is doing both humans and non-human permissions management, which is a defense in depth security play for a lot of enterprises and give them immediate protection against a lot of breaches that are happening. Thanks, John. Really appreciate you. Always love hearing your wisdom. And I'm sure that the audience will hear it, and hopefully they can reach out to us, or they can reach out to these NHI groups to figure out what the best practices are. Obviously, we are here to help as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.